The U.S. president is unveiling plans for even more tariffs. He now says copper imports will be hit with a 50% levy, but didn't say when it would take effect. The threat caused prices of the metal to hit an all-time high. Last year, the U.S. imported $17 billion worth of copper, a crucial component in electronics, machinery, and cars. President Trump also revived his plan to slap 200% tariffs on pharmaceuticals, saying an announcement is coming very soon. He's argued that the U.S. needs more domestic drug manufacturing, but acknowledged that could take a while. This all comes a day after the White House pushed back its so-called reciprocal tariffs against these 14 countries to next month.
The big money will start coming in on August 1st. I think it was made clear today by the letters that were sent out yesterday and today. Go ahead, please.
Yes, sir. We will take in about $100 billion in tariff income thus far this year, and that's with the tariffs, the major tariff not having started till the second quarter. So we could expect that could be well over $300 billion by the end of the year.
Right now, Wall Street doesn't seem overly concerned about the growing tariff campaign. U.S. stocks were mixed on Tuesday. The Dow fell about 1/3%. The S&P closed marginally lower, and the Nasdaq gained slightly. Here's a look at the U.S. futures. The Dow, S&P, and 500 and Nasdaq are all expected to open slightly higher as uncertainty over the tariffs continue to loom. And Donald Trump is once again venting his anger at Russian President Vladimir Putin as the U.S. president's efforts to broker a peace deal with Ukraine continue to fall short. During a cabinet meeting on Tuesday, he expressed his frustration by using an expletive. President Trump said the Russian leader throws a lot of BS at the United States, offering very nice words that turn out to be meaningless. Those remarks appear to be the clearest sign yet of the U.S. president's growing frustration with Moscow, which has shown no willingness to end its war in Ukraine. Just a short time ago, the Ukrainian government said Russia launched more than 740 drones and missiles overnight, its largest such attack since the war began. President Trump says he plans to press U.S. defense contractors to step up their production of weapons and munitions to help Ukraine defend itself. The president, who had promised to end the war in Ukraine on day one of his second term, now admits it's tougher than he expected. Still, he has stopped short of endorsing new sanctions on Moscow.
We're dealing with him now, too. We're not happy with Putin. I'm not happy with Putin. I can tell you that much right now, because he's killing a lot of people. And a lot of them are his soldiers and their soldiers, mostly. And it's now up to 7,000 a week. And I'm not happy with Putin.
We'll go live now to London and CNN's Claire Sebastian. Claire, tell us more about these latest drone attacks.
Yeah, MJ, this was not only a record, but it absolutely smashed through the previous record set just 4 days ago. 728 drones and 13 missiles. The injury and death toll, we've had no reports of fatalities so far, just one injury in a suburb of Kiev. I think striking as well that most of these drones we're hearing were targeting an area really close to the Polish border in western Ukraine. The town of Lutsk is just over about 50 miles from the Polish border, which is a NATO country, and the attack was so intense that Poland had to scramble its fighter jets, not, I should note, for the first time in this war. So a high rate of repelling the drones and missiles from the Ukrainian Air Force, but still this is an exponential escalation. 728 drones is more than we would get in a single month this time last year. So this really obviously concentrates the minds in Ukraine when it comes to what we're hearing from President Trump. Yes, we're seeing the anger and frustration consistently rising, and that has been coming over the past few weeks. And obviously that's very welcome for Ukraine after bouts in the past we've seen of anger directed towards Ukraine. That, along with the promise of new weapons, is very significant. But of course, the question now for Ukraine is when this will happen. Russia clearly not waiting around to find out, and they're treading a very fine line diplomatically. We see on the one hand, a hefty dose of gratitude and flattery. For example, the head of President Zelensky's office, Andriy Yermak, his right-hand man, gave an interview to the New York Post on Tuesday, and he said, look, we've seen President Trump's recent messaging on Ukraine, and frankly, we're impressed. No exaggeration. He says the clarity the leadership, the determination. He goes on to say, we truly appreciate it, and says he's the only leader who can make Putin move not just to this imitation of the negotiations, but real negotiations. So this clearly playing towards the sort of the flattery that we've seen from various quarters of the US president. But on the other hand, I think Ukraine has to point out that it's still not enough. And we see renewed calls this morning off the back of these drone attacks from President Zelensky for more and tougher sanctions on Russia.
All right, Claire Sebastian in London, thank you so much. Meanwhile, we're learning more about the Trump administration's decision to pause weapon shipments to Ukraine last week before the president later said that those shipments will continue. 5 sources familiar with the matter tell CNN that Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth did not inform the White House before he authorized that pause on military aid. During the cabinet meeting on Tuesday, President Trump suggested he didn't know who was responsible for the decision. The White House says the Defense Department conducted a review to, quote, ensure all support going to all foreign nations aligns with America's interests. Live now to Julia Manchester, a politics reporter for The Hill here in Washington. Julia, it's great to see you. There's a lot from yesterday's cabinet meeting that I want to dissect, but let's first talk about this new reporting that Secretary Hegseth didn't inform the White House before he authorized this pause on weapons shipments to Ukraine, this decision that, of course, was then reversed. What do you make of the back and forth, and should we expect real fallout for Hegseth?
Yeah, good morning, MJ. Look, if you look at Pete Hegseth's tenure, or very short tenure so far as Secretary of Defense, we've seen that it certainly has been rocky in terms of his press coverage. There, of course, was Signalgate, and we saw that the White House very much came out in defense of him, multiple times. He's often seen with the president. I think the president likes to see Pete Hegseth on TV, very telegenic. That really fits what Trump is looking for in, a position like this. However, I think the more negative stories we see coming out about, potential miscommunications between the White House and the Department of Defense, that may not bode well for Hegseth, potentially, particularly when President Trump is put on the spot about it in an area such as a cabinet meeting. And it seems that President Trump, if you just look at that cabinet meeting in general, was frustrated with the situation in Ukraine, particularly with Russian President Vladimir Putin. I think President Trump obviously wants to see this conflict ended as soon as possible. Even though President Trump's relationship with Ukrainian leaders has certainly been, or Vladimir Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, has certainly been rocky, I think he's very frustrated by this ongoing conflict and, the administration's not being able to necessarily facilitate a ceasefire or a pause between Russia and Ukraine. So I think going forward, I don't know if Hegseth's necessarily treading on, walking a very fine line at this point, but I think the more negative stories don't bode well for him.
Yeah, and another moment of frustration for President Trump in that very newsy cabinet meeting yesterday was when he was asked about Jeffrey Epstein and this new DOJ report that said that he had died by suicide and that there is no evidence of a client list. Listen.
Are you still talking about Jeffrey Epstein? This guy's been talked about for years. You're asking, we have Texas, we have this, we have all of the things. And are people still talking about this guy, this creep? That is unbelievable.
And then right after that, Attorney General Pam Bondi, who you saw there sitting just one seat away from the president, had to do some cleanup. Explain why there is such fury about the DOJ's Epstein report inside the MAGA world.
Well, look, I think the MAGA world was expecting more transparency. They were expecting to see, more information on Jeffrey Epstein, not to see, so much redacted. I think this was played up so much that, that they were expecting to get more, and they simply did not. So you're this is a moment of frustration for President Trump because it's coming from his own base that was, particularly interested in finding out more about this case and getting more information. And, to President Trump, to his point there, he'd rather be talking about the passage of the One Big Beautiful Bill and, how that's going to be implemented, the administration's response to the flooding in Texas. So, it's for him, I think it takes the spotlight away from those issues, and he's forced to confront this divide within his own base, or this frustration within his own base about a character who simply, he has past ties to, et cetera, he doesn't necessarily want to talk about.
Yeah, and you definitely wonder if there could be fallout for Pam Bondi in any way, too. Julia, there's also just more tariffs news. Trump says he's imposing a new 50% tariff on copper imports. There's going to be new tariffs coming on pharmaceuticals as well. All of this is on top of the new tariff rates that he plans to impose on many countries starting in August. What do you think the end game is for President Trump when it comes to tariffs?
Well, the administration, says they want, countries to essentially pay their fair share for pharmaceuticals. They want more pharmaceuticals to be produced here in the United States. So it's difficult, I think, for the administration right now, because they want to talk this tough game on tariffs, and they want to use this, this tool of negotiating and leverage with a number of these countries. The problem is right now here in the U.S., we could see, continued increases in pricing, which is a big problem for President Trump and Republicans. Trump very much campaigned on this issue of lowering costs, lowering inflation. So there is a risk with this strategy. The administration is also combating, stories, rhetoric, the taco. Trump always chickens out in negotiation talk when it comes to tariffs. So I think right now the administration wants the U.S. to have more leverage when it comes to trade. The U.S. not, pay as much, produce more here. But we'll see if that actually happens. We know that it's been difficult, I think, for the administration to balance lowering costs here while at the same time dealing with tariffs abroad.
Julia Manchester, good to see you. Thank you.